usually are responsible for introducing people to any chemical comfort. That people are introduced to these drugs because a doctor might prescribe them. They're introduced to them because they might work with them. But most importantly of all are those that we meet because there are established social customs involved in their use. And it's in this area that we shall be dealing in this talk, and we'll attempt to deal with those situations that combine to determine the dose of alcohol. Now here we again divide the initial social dependence related to two things: social problems and drinking customs. The social problems that we encounter we'll consider our personal social relationships, our occupational, and our regional. And under the drinking customs, consider it about heavy drinking customs, moderate, light, or none at all. Now at this board, we shall attempt to deal with these situations in some more detail. And first of all, supply. You can't become over-involved with any substance if you can't get hold of it. And if you acquire a need for something in large quantities, then it must be important for you to obtain a large supply. Now, what are some of these social factors that are concerned with supply? Well, first, the social custom. There are some well-established social customs that approve of very modest drinking, and not any great supply of alcohol is required in order to meet these customs. I think, for example, of the approved drinking practices of Orthodox Judaism. And if one were to adhere to these drinking practices, it would be most unlikely that one would have a range of alcoholic experiences which would be likely to have you use it as a drug. It would be most unlikely you'd ever become over-dependent on it, and most unlikely that you'd ever, say, be up for an impaired driving charge. But on the other hand, let's say that you are involved in drinking in military service. And for many, many centuries it has been accepted that heavy drinking is a part of the life in military circles. So that by going along with these practices, a person can be involved by a social situation in the repeated use of alcohol and what can turn out to be stress or harmful quantities. Now, another social factor is money. Several studies have been made to indicate that the more money a person has, the more likely he is, on the average, to become over-involved with alcohol. The more likely he is to use alcohol repeatedly in quantities that are injurious. Now, this is probably related to the fact that other studies would indicate that, for example, more college graduates are in trouble with alcohol than high school graduates, and more high school graduates than public school graduates, and possibly related to the fact that not only are they up where probably there could be more stresses and responsibilities, but they're earning more money, they're in more responsible positions. But certainly money, the amount of money you have to spend, is a very, very significant factor, and the price of alcoholic beverages is a very significant factor. Now, availability. You can't get in trouble with something you can't get hold of. Now, availability, I think, of alcoholic beverages is almost an academic point. Alcohol is available in most parts of the world, available in far larger quantities than we could drink safely. But availability, of course, is a very significant factor with dependence upon heroin. Other drugs that aren't anything like as readily available. Becomes quite a significant political decision as to how many outlets should be, how many outlets should be provided, how many outlets would be compatible with the health of the public. Peer pressure. Now let's look at this peer pressure bit from, well, sort of, as it might relate to two groups. Young people and adults. Of course, as young people pick up a particular interest or practice in using chemicals of any kind, then there can be very strong pressures for others in their age group and their peer group to do likewise. And this begins to be quite a puzzling thing for health authorities to understand and to follow and to control when there seems to be a steady shift in preference, steady shift in the practices that are approved by one's peers. For example, back in the 60s, there was quite a shift in interest in a variety of drugs, speed, acid, and so on. Now it seems that in the 70s, there seems to be a greater interest on the part of young people in alcohol. And there seems to be a tendency to zero in on this old drug and to lose some of the interest in the ones that quite recently were popular. But you might think this peer pressure is only a factor with the young, and that isn't the case. Because many people only feel comfortable if they are conforming to the accepted, usual social practices around them. I remember a little chap from up north who was the first person from his outlying lumbering community to come for help with an alcohol problem. Before he went back, he told me, you know, I am very frightened, very worried, because my decision to get help for this alcohol problem was quite unpopular. And men back there where I work, including my foreman, many of them drink more than I do. But they aren't into my kind of trouble yet. So what can I do? And in that case, we were able to help out by writing a letter back to the boss of the company, to the local physician, and it was the boss that told the rest of them, look, for health reasons it has become important for this man to stop drinking. And I want you to help him, not hinder him. I want him to be able to join with you in the rather limited social activities there are in this lumber camp. And it worked. But he was frightened to go back. It's a very common thing in social circles, the cocktail set, to find a woman absolutely horrified at the thought that Mrs. Jones might find out, for example. And they will resist getting involved in treatment, getting involved in understanding their problems out of fear of what the others are going to say. So this peer pressure can be a very potent force in keeping a person into a particular drinking practice, a factor contributing to the seedbed in which an increasingly large dose is acquired. Now, changing attitudes. Attitudes are changing to everything. Attitudes to drinking, attitudes to the use of drugs, attitudes to all of our established social situations. Now, the attitudes about alcohol that we're attempting to cope with until very recently have been the carryover of attitudes from the last century, mainly determined by the concepts of the classic temperance movement, in which all drinking was a sin. Heavy drinking was a particular sin. And those who were involved in alcohol at all were social rejects. They were deliberately going against the interests of the community. So that if there was any attention paid to those who were disabled by an uncontrolled dependence in the last century, they were likely to find themselves in prisons or medical prisons. They were rejected by the community, and believe me, it was a very unfortunate person who happened to be involved with an alcohol problem at that time. We've begun to change these attitudes a bit, And now, as a result of the developments in the middle third of this century, there's quite a change in attitude. Quite a change in attitude. We are no longer so upset at the thought of somebody drinking to excess. We no longer even have to do what was the only thing that could be done in the 30s when Alcoholics Anonymous was established. That is, form a secret society, go underground in order to meet this thing. It is now possible to discuss problem drinking more openly. It is now possible to involve all of the community, not just those who are in the same boat because they have the same kind of problems. Now, what are we going to do with these changes in attitudes? Well, with freedom, we have the demand, the need for responsibility. If we are going to remove ourselves from the restraints that were imposed in an earlier attempt to keep drinking at a safe level, then we must take the trouble to find out the basic facts about what does determine heavy drinking, dangerous drinking, and what does not. Because only with this kind of knowledge can freedom be involved in responsibility. Responsibility for our own behavior, responsibility for its impact on others. Now, let's just move over and summarize some of the dose factors now. Some of the factors that combine to take the place of the doctor's advice in determining the total dose of alcohol. How much, how often, how long? By total dose, how much is taken, say, in the period of a year, not just on one occasion? Well, first of all, under these physical predisposing factors, how much can he take without getting sick? Or how much does he enjoy those high levels? Those are important factors. Does he have a physical problem that he tries to treat using this old drug alcohol in a symptomatic way? How intense is his need to achieve a chemical holiday? How intense is his need to achieve a change in the way he feels? Because the more intense his need, the higher the dose required to produce it. How many personal problems does he have which might be contributing to his desire to feel different? How many occupational problems? How many problems with the neighbors and so on? All of these things combine to determine how much is taken, how often it's taken, over what period of time. Now, the point that we should remember is that at this stage, in this panel, we're talking about reactive drinking. Our drinking, even though it might be heavy drinking, is a reaction to a personal need or a social situation or both. One could have a harmful dependence at this stage, a dependence on harmful quantities. But by and large, at this stage, it's a controlled harmful dependence. And we don't have to be concerned about the changes of addiction until it's maintained long enough to be anchored down by that second panel of problems. So in conclusion here, we have attempted to review the seedbed in which a dependence upon alcohol in unhealthy, in harmful, in stressor quantities can begin. And if we can ever study this sufficiently that back at this stage we can impart this information properly to people, we will have eventually identified the techniques not only for early recognition but for prevention.